Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high income earners come to learn wealth building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast, where we talk all things money and business. My name's Christian Allen. I'm here with my co-host. You know him as Rodney the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's up, man?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Okay, I'm excited, Rod, because we have got a third co-host.
Yes, sir.
Who anyone who's been listening to the podcast will at least recognize our good friend, Tim Whelan. Tim, what's up, man?
You know, it's going well. How are you guys today?
Excellent.
Doing
I like
great.
that you're standing. You're standing, aren't you?
You know, sitting's the new smoking. You gotta stand, gotta keep the blood pumping.
I love it. Sitting is the new smoking. All right. Well, I'm feeling not so good about what I'm myself sitting
Yeah,
right now, but
I
here
feel
we
like
go.
I'm going to live a shorter life now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Rod, we have to consider that. Now, it's interesting. I actually had heard, this was years ago, and I'm sure it's the case, but like higher energy, like you can put more energy forth when you're standing. And so I remember back when I was on the call center floor, like 25 years ago, dialing outbound calls for Discover Card. And they were encouraging you to stand up, get that blood pumping so you can go. Anyway, Tim, I like the standing dynamic. Hopefully it'll bring the energy. Okay.
The good
So
news
Tim,
is-
today
Good news
What's
is
the
that you
good
and I
news?
both have standing desks.
we do.
Gotta
So are you
Pump
saying
them
we
up
should
here.
just
I don't know. I don't know
raise
that I
it
wanna
up?
risk, messing things up right now, but
Mid podcast is probably a bad time to
Yeah.
raise the desk anyway. So next time. Okay. Today we're going to talk about the importance of business exit planning. I think more than that, we want to talk about the importance of optimizing the value of your business so that it's ready for the most impactful, valuable sell if and when the time comes when you actually decide to sell it. That's the
because
plan.
I'm going to try to convince you not to sell your business, actually.
oh boy.
Whoa.
Not
Okay,
what any
well-
of the exit planning advisors out there tell you. They always want you to go to that exit.
They want you to sell it. They're like, sell this, and then I'll manage all the money from there. Right?
Right.
Okay. But Tim's going to take the high road and he's going to tell us I was going to say the dirty truth, but Tim's going to tell us how this thing actually works. Okay. But here's a little bit of background. So Tim's actually has a cool designation. It's the CEPA designation. Tell me what the acronym stands for.
Certified Exit Planning Advisor.
Okay.
There you
So
go.
we have with us in our midst a certified exit planning advisor. Luckily, we also have Rod and I that have 20 years plus of experience in this space. And so hopefully the three of us together can come up with some valuable information. Okay. But again, we want to talk about why we think this is a critical thing to be thinking about. So Tim, I want to turn it over to you for a second to just give us some context on two things. One, maybe what is like business exit succession planning? There's like all these words that kind of mean the same thing. So maybe just to like, what is it? Well, actually, let's start there. What is it? What does it mean?
Exit planning in the traditional sense would be as owners decide, hey, it's time for me to step away. I need to put together a plan, whether it usually involves your CPA, your attorney, maybe estate planning attorney and business attorney. You've got your business coach. You've got maybe a family coach. You have all sorts of players, obviously a financial advisor, your insurance team, to make sure that you're going to optimize the process from a valuation standpoint. Can you get the highest value, or maybe not always the highest value, but the best fit in an exit? And then how do you maximize your profitability off of that sale by optimizing taxes and things like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's one of those things that kind of just makes sense, but maybe let's talk a little bit about why it's important to start thinking about that early. And let's just say, okay, so in theory, let's just say I'm a business owner. I'm a physician that started their practice and I'm maybe 7 or 8 years into it. I'm probably going to go for another 20 years. Why do I need to be thinking about this whole business exit strategy planning stuff? Isn't it something that I can push till I'm maybe, a couple years away from it? What do you think on that?
I think the first paradigm shift that we got to make is that good exit planning is simply just good business planning. So you need to start now thinking about how you make your business the kind of business that would be a great business to buy, meaning you as the owner have more time, freedom, and time and freedom. So, and obviously a profitable business. So if you're planning for a business that's like that, you're actually setting yourself up to be the kind of owner that could sit in that owner seat much longer than maybe someone else could that was relying on their own energy and efforts to push every little bit of the business forward.
Okay. And I was going to say, talk a little bit about why it's so important to do, but we probably have hit on that, right? Like at the end of the day, the reason is for value and fit. Maybe there's some other things that come to mind, but those are the two.
So why is it important? I mean, first of all, if you get too late into the game and you decide to start planning when there's something really urgent on the horizon, whether it's a health issue, and we talk about the 5 Ds that can be kind of surprise exit instigators. You've got divorce, disagreement among the partners, disability, death, unfortunately, can come in, and distress. Any sort of factor that comes in outside or inside the business that unforeseen, whether it's natural disaster or an economic situation, macroeconomic situation going on. So you want to make sure that you're in position to do that, because if you start planning for your exit when one of those triggers happens, you're too late. You've wiped off most of the options that you have. Your value is going to be greatly diminished in terms of what you can get from the sale because you're selling a distressed asset. So having all these things lined up on the front end and building in such a way that you're in a place to be able to sell whenever that time comes is great for the person that's 5 years in and has 25 years in front of them, because if you make your business saleable, transferable, it's going to be better for you as the owner.
Okay, so maybe I like the 5 Ds. Oh, go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, maybe I can just add some context from talking to people out there, business owners. And there are some, I'm going to put them in 3 camps, basically. There are some who say, I know I need to do this. I'm just not, right? I'm procrastinating it, or it's just going to be too painful, or I'm too busy or whatever. So they're just,
okay, Rod, I'm going to challenge you.
Okay.
Can you, when you're going to do these 3 categories, I don't want you to forget them, but then I want you to put a percentage on what percentage fits into each category.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So that's the first camp. The second camp is those who aren't ever planning on selling. So why do any planning around it? Right. It's just going to stay in the family, or it's just going to whatever. Right. I'm going to do it till the day I die, and then I don't care what happens after that. Kind of that camp who just doesn't think that that's ever going to happen. And then the third camp is one that just assumes it's going to happen and doesn't realize they need to do any planning around it, right? A good example of this comes to mind. We met with a gentleman who was a dentist, very successful dentist in a rural area in, I can't remember which state, maybe Kentucky or something. And he just assumed he was going to be able to sell his business. And then when we first talked with him, he was getting ready to sell. When we talked to him again 2 years later, he hadn't sold, and he was basically just kind of coming to the realization that it probably just never would, just that it wasn't going to happen. So those are kind of 3 camps. Okay, so now percentages,
yeah.
I guess I should have a 4th camp of people who just aren't even thinking about it. They're just like, hey, I'm just trying to make my business
not even on the radar. They just want to get
I don't
going.
even know what you're talking about with what's
yeah, that's probably fair.
End. Because let's start there. That one's probably at least a third.
Okay. A lot of people are just busy building. They're trying to build. They can't even think about they're like exit. I got to figure out how to stay in my business.
Exactly. Yep.
Before I'm forced to exit.
Yep.
That's the most common answer that I come across.
Yep.
Okay.
And then those who have some sort of realization, but they're just choosing not to, it's probably a minority, maybe 10 to 15%, I would say. And then those who are just saying, I'm just going to keep it. It's never going to happen. It's going to be in the family, whatever. Maybe like 15 to 20%. And then those who just assume part of my retirement is that I'm going to be able to sell my business, but it's just going to happen when I get there. They don't realize that maybe it's just out of ignorance, probably more than anything else, that I need to be thinking about it now. And again, that's probably somewhere in the 15 to 20% range.
Yeah. I have no idea what the percentage came out to, Rod, but I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had people come really excited about selling their business, but it's like sold, right? Like they're like, hey guys, I'm getting a few $1 million
Yeah.
and I need to make sure that I don't pay any capital gains tax or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Like what can I do now that I've got this money in my bank account? Well, to Tim's point, it's just too late. It's too late at that point to do stuff. So just starting with the idea in mind, right? Start with the end in mind. Making sure that I'm preparing for that time. It just makes sense, right? It makes logical sense. Okay. Where do we want to go next? We talked a little bit about.
I think it might make sense to dig into just a few specific examples because people might be able to put themselves somewhere here. Now, obviously,
Perfect.
you know, some of these businesses are going to be bigger than listeners' businesses. Some of them might be smaller. You just, you know, add the zero where you need to or take it away. But thought an interesting story was, you guys ever heard of Rose Blumpkin?
Rose Blumpkin?
She is.
I like her last name. I like both.
She is
first and
Warren
last name,
Buffett's
actually.
favorite operator for one of those companies.
Okay.
And she has the unique designation of having had to be bought out by Warren Buffett twice. So she's this really interesting character. We don't have enough time to get into all of her story, but she's, I think, a Russian immigrant, comes over, doesn't know the language at all, starts selling furniture, basically wholesale inside people's homes, builds this huge business, Nebraska Furniture Mart. Ends up deciding to sell to Warren Buffett because he was going to allow her to kind of maintain control of the business. She's able to take some chips off the table. She ends up starting to transition some power within the company to her grandsons. And Warren was kind of backing the grandsons, and they started to change a few things. And she's this really stubborn 90-year-old lady or something at the time. Really, I mean, I think she's in her 90s. And falling out, she leaves the business and starts her own furniture store across the street, which becomes enough of a nuisance to Nebraska Furniture Mart that she actually has to be bought out again. She ends up reconciling with her grandkids. But you think about the family dynamics, especially when you have kind of a strong-headed founder, which a lot of us in the world of business, we tend to be like that. You get family dynamics involved, so that the people that say, hey, I'm just going to sell to my kids, does your kid really want that? Is that what they want? Is it best for them? Are they equipped to do it? And so, I mean, questions like that are often really hard to, really emotional. There's a lot of stuff tied in there. So, I mean, if you've got the plan to transfer it to kids, that's great, but there are a lot of things you got to walk through. Another thing that comes to my mind is Paul Orfalea. He was the founder of Kinko's, grew that company to be a really large company, sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars to private equity, I believe. And they turned around and flipped it to FedEx, I think. But Paul does not set foot in a Kinko's store anymore. He is just completely soured to the whole idea. When private equity bought him, they stripped out some of the things that made Kinko's really special in his mind, and shifted a lot of the culture. He had employees then coming up to him, kind of voicing their concerns, because he always said, "Hey, talk to me about your concerns." But he's powerless to do anything at this point. So he's just kind of this lame duck walking at the company for a couple of years before leaving. And so this whole idea of who's the right seller for the business comes into it. So that was probably the top dollar that he could get, but what are they going to do with your employees? What's going to happen to the legacy of the company afterwards? Is that important to you? Now, sometimes for your family, for your lifestyle, sometimes the top dollar is the best offer. But I think really thinking through, who do I want this business to go to? What's that going to do to my customers? What's that going to do to my employees that have been there? Another, I guess, not so great story. I guess, I mean, it's not that bad. It's somebody in our exit planning environment. They talked about somebody who actually sold at the perfect time. They timed the market perfectly while valuations were still high before 2022 came in. So private equity valuations were super high. Strategic buyer valuations were super high. Guy sells pretty much at the peak. And when interviewed by one of his advisors a couple months after the sale, he said, it was nice when that check hit my bank account, but I regret every day selling this company. I've got more in the tank, and I don't know what to do with my life.
Well, I was going to ask you, Tim, like, what are the benefits beyond just money? And you're getting at it. Anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
It's exactly right, because I mean, I think you guys could probably relate to this. I can certainly relate to this. Probably too much of our identities are tied up in the work that we do. And what does it look like?
Not me, Tim. That might be a you issue. That's not a me issue.
We all know that you're better than us, Christian. No. So yeah, what does it look like? What are you going to do with your time? I mean, some people have a really clear vision for what that's going to be. A next chapter, digging into, a cause or something like that, or really intentional travel. But even the whole, like, hey, I'm going to travel the world, after the third or fourth trip,
you're like,
the luster wears off as far as what we hear from the field.
Tim, is this coming from experience? Have you traveled the world 3 or 4 times now, and you're just like, much. I'm done. I'm done.
No, this is all grapevine at this point.
Okay.
I have not personally experienced it yet. No.
I do think that's accurate though. Like, not just try. It can be anything, anybody that works with purpose, enough purpose to create a business of significance, is likely not just suddenly going to stop having the ambition, desire to like create, build. And so it doesn't just go away if you sell a business, right? So anyway, a lot of it is that ongoing desire, more than just what's the value of the business. That's why I was kind of hitting on this idea of like beyond thinking about money, because we can all, I shouldn't say that. It's not easy to get money, but a lot of people have money, right, that still aren't happy. And so therefore what? Well, in a business situation, I think the goal is to do it at the optimal time rather than necessarily at the top dollar, or in a situation where, like you said, one of the 5 Ds, right? If you can focus on the big O, I'm calling it the big O. The big O, that's the optimal time, and avoid the 5 Ds. I don't remember what all the 5: death, distress,
divorce,
disability, divorce, disagreement. Gosh, Tim, I was going to get all of those. Anyway,
sorry that I robbed you of the opportunity.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take us off course, but
no, it's exactly what I was getting at, because you got to figure out what your next chapter is. If you aren't really confident in what that is, I think you should spend some time planning. And then the last story, this one's makes you feel a little gross about human nature, but it was actually
that's encouraging. Excited to hear this, Tim.
Another owner that was in the network of planners that I work with, and the guy intentionally did no planning, like very intentionally, because he is this high ego guy, and he wanted his family to see that everything was reliant on him, and when he was gone, everything would fall apart. And that's what happened.
That's me.
It was an absolute mess. And so, don't be that guy, obviously.
Yeah, don't be that guy.
I mean, the irony of all of it, you were kind of getting this a little bit, Christian, but the irony of the exit planning conversation is, I would encourage you to, really, think twice about selling. I would spend more time focusing on how do I make my company as transferable as possible. Think about this, the 30-day test. So if you were to leave your business and go off the grid for a month and come back, would your business have gotten everything done? Would it have run as if you were there?
Mine would run way better. Way better. They'd be like, finally, this jokester is out of my way. Rod would be like, holy smokes.
That's why you're getting so passionate about AI. You're like, if I can let AI
AI do it, then and it'll do it much better. It has way more knowledge. Yeah, there's something to that. Sorry, I didn't mean to take us off track again, Tim. But you're right. We don't want to be the guys that are doing it the wrong way, right?
Well,
that makes sense to me.
To your point, leveraging AI, leveraging, getting good leadership in place at the company. I mean, all those things you joke, but creates a valuable company. You don't want the company to be reliant on you. That is the biggest issue in exit planning across the industry that I see and hear. businesses are way too owner centric.
And
Okay.
it's a huge thing, especially in a lot of the people that are listening to us in the medical profession, because how do they drive so much of their revenue? By showing up every day and seeing patients and making that happen. So if you're not thinking about 2 or 3 steps down the road of because again, in that scenario, if you disappear for 30 days, then there's no revenue for 30 days if
Right.
you're the only revenue source. So how can you think differently about your business in a way so that you can transition out of it and it still has value? That may be, again, the example I gave a little bit ago with this dentist, that may have been one of the issues is if he's just there showing up every day and then all of a sudden one day he says, hey, I want to sell this, but I'm not going to continue showing up. Well, then who does want to buy it? Right.
Well, and not that I'm trying to scare everybody today, but if you're scared by this, then maybe you probably should be. The first attempt at building succession within the organization usually fails. So, I mean, there's all sorts of dynamics, right? Does a person that I'm bringing in, do they want to own the business? Do they want to own this business? Is the timetable too short, too long for them? So, even starting down that road, had that friend of yours, done a lot of aggressive recruiting, maybe 5 or 10 years before he was ready, then he either would have found, okay, here's somebody that I can try. And then if that doesn't work, let's try to get somebody else in. And then, if he wasn't finding anyone, then that gives him a sense for, okay, what am I dealing with? And that will help him to plan from the personal financial side. How much do I need to be extracting from the business in order to be where I need to be from a monetary perspective? Yep. So it's all sorts of these questions. They aren't fun to think about, but the great news is, I've done a lot of bad news. The great news is, if you think about these and you do good planning for eventual exit, like I said, it actually makes the business one that you can hold longer and enjoy more.
And more valuable.
Or sell for more. Like, here's the deal. If you can put yourself through the 30-day rule, if your business can go through that, then obviously it, just by being able to do that, makes it tremendously more valuable, right? Kind of everybody knows that the more automated, the more passive it is, the more valuable it is. So that makes complete sense. Okay, here's the thing. Before we get on to, before we move topics, I want to talk about like the pitfalls of not doing it. So we're going to stay a little bit negative for a little bit longer. This is where you like to live, Tim. No, I'm just kidding. Just today. But let's talk a little bit about what are some of the common pitfalls that people make. I want to do that. And then I want to talk about what, at least an idea of what it actually looks like to plan, to craft an exit strategy. Okay. So let's talk about pitfalls first. And I have a handful that I can throw out there, but do you guys want to go first? Do you want me to roll with it?
Yeah, go ahead and roll. I've got a few things I can add.
I've got a bunch of them. Procrastination, huge pitfall, right? We've talked about that. Rod was kind of going through the different people or the different segments, and the procrastinators always end up with the short end of the stick. It just is the way it is most of the time.
And they'll feel the worst about it too, because they're like, I knew I should have done something. I just never did.
Yeah, it's bad. I'm a procrastinator. I hate being one of those. Gosh.
You guys
Okay.
read Who Not How? Who does Who Not How? Oh,
Who Not How. All right, I'm gonna check it out.
Anyway, whoever the strategic coach is. Anyway, but Who Not How, he actually thinks that procrastination is like kind of like a superpower, and it's because it tells you this is something I should not be spending a lot of time personally figuring out. And so the answer is, how do you solve procrastination? It's not how do I accomplish this thing? It's who do I get to help me accomplish this thing?
I like it. Tim's not only an exit planner, he's an efficiency expert.
Well, yep. I think it speaks into the process, right?
I love it.
You want to have a team that's working around you. You want to make sure that your estate planning attorney is not just an estate planning attorney. They're an estate planning attorney that's walked through the process of transition and succession with businesses, and they know how to structure estate plan to avoid the common pitfalls that come from, estate tax and, all sorts of these.
You nailed one of the pitfalls,
right?
Okay, I want to get to the other. I've got a bunch of pitfalls, and I think I think they're really valuable. So here's the thing: I'm going to go through them. You guys can tell me which ones we want to actually touch on more, or if we're good to just leave it at overestimating the business value. That's a big one, right? I'm sure we 100%. See that. And anytime that we're personally invested, it's hard not to. Like, we have this hope that our business, this thing that we've created, is more valuable. So that's one. Neglecting training and development, especially for like the people inside the business, right? You can't transfer the business. You can't pass the 30-day rule if you don't have proper training and development. Emotional decision-making, failing to communicate, not seeking expert advice, inadequate documentation, and ignoring contingencies. Those are, one more, not reviewing and adjusting your plan.
Yeah, those are awesome.
I just think those are things to be thinking about. Okay.
When you talk about documentation, I'm assuming you mean like this is a super common thing that we see. You know, owners, they're focused on other things. They don't have an accounting background. They might not have a controller. And so you go into their records, and if you're going to get a strategic buyer or private equity to come in, it's just going to be a nightmare. They're going to run you through the ringer because you don't have historic financials and, you know, things like that.
Absolutely. All of that stuff. And it's messy, right? It's like if you go to do your taxes and you don't have any of your tax documents ready, you're scrambling around trying to find things. So the business, it becomes even more critical because there's obviously an additional layer of complexity above and beyond just your personal stuff. And so having those things put together the right way. And again, like if you're someone like me that is not even capable of doing that, you've got to have a partner like Rod who can. And so one way or another, you got to have your stuff in order. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about what creating an exit strategy like might look like. So let's just say theoretically, somebody's like, Tim, I totally buy into what you're saying. Like, I know that the business needs to be, I need to have a strategic plan all the way through. Maybe they're 5-10 years in and it's successful. There's not necessarily any indication of selling and at any specific time frame, but like where might somebody start inside this? Because like you mentioned, there can be complexity, there's different advisors, but like, what's the starting point for people as they know they want to get a plan in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is almost always to do a detailed, comprehensive valuation of the business. That's the starting point almost every time. And you want to look at the value of the company. You certainly want to get the value based on comparable sales, you know, different sales approaches, discounted cash flows, kind of have a sense how all these buzzwords in the selling world work.
EBITDA, you got to know your EBITDA.
Yeah, you definitely got to know that. So you want to know that sort of, you know, where you fit in the multiples, but you want to know kind of the range of multiples that you might fall into, and then be able to assess where you are within that range. And a lot of that comes down to some of those. Go ahead.
How does somebody, what is it? So someone's saying, okay, I get it, I need a business valuation. Are you talking like get an expert business valuation, or are you just saying understand how business valuation works, at least to some degree, and do some, you know, basic comparing to get an idea? What are you thinking?
I think it's almost always worth having some level of professional valuation. There's different levels of valuation. Yeah. There's certified valuations, professional valuations.
Okay, but at least you need to get an outside.
You need a valuation with real comps. So it's not just one of these, you know, off the shelf, you know, you pay $25 to get a valuation. You want to have real comparable sales within a certain range. And then along with that, you should be, you know, doing some sort of an assessment of the intangible parts of the business. So that you hit on, I think, all of these, Christian, when you just went through your pitfalls. Right? Your human capital. So do you have, you know, the right people in place? Do they have the right training? You've got your customer capital. Are you super concentrated in like one source of business? That's something that you should be thinking about. Structural capital, if you have like, you know, heavy equipment, or, you know, even, you know, in a medical practice, you're going to have, you know, equipment and things like that. So what's the state of your structural capital? And then there's the social capital, which best understood is kind of your company culture. So, is that something that is consistent? Is, the way that your company thinks about things and makes decisions, is that something that's kind of a machine and isn't reliant completely on you? So those will help you to determine if you're kind of at the lower end of your industry or closer to best in class. And that's really helpful to know, because if you think about it, if you've got some number that you need to hit, now it's probably more complex than that, but let's say you've got, some number that you need to hit to be completely financially independent, live the lifestyle you want to live. You have a gap, most likely. So you've got a gap between where you are now and where you need to be. So one of them is just the value gap. So my company is worth X, and I need it to be worth this, right? So there's the business value where it currently stands today. But then there's also that range of values, right? You've got your best in class sort of multiple, and then you've got kind of the lower end multiple. So you've got two levers that you can tweak. One of the levers you can tweak is your profitability. You can become more profitable on the current revenue, the current size that you have. And if you can do that, you're obviously going to dial up that EBITDA and you're going to get a higher valuation. But then alongside of that, if you can clean up some of those intangible sides of the business and move yourself closer to best in class, you're getting kind of a compound effect where not only are you getting a higher valuation from being more profitable, but you're also becoming a more valuable, more best in class kind of company. So you'd want to work on both of those, but the valuation is where you start. You start with a valuation and you see where you're at today. And so that gives you the gaps. It shows you where you can work. And then you go through the process of de-risking the business. Let's say that you had one customer that makes up the bulk of your revenue. What are the strategic plans that are being put into place to mitigate that? How are we going to diversify our customer base a little bit more? Things like that. So you're going to de-risk the business, then you're going to go through some sort of evaluation acceleration process. How do we increase the value of this company? And then the next step would be, you're at a decision point. Do we sell or do we grow? And if you grow, then you go back through the process. You get another valuation, assess your gaps, de-risk the business a little bit more, increase the value, and then make a decision again.
Tim, I'd like to meet with you to talk about how to increase the value of my business. Is there a time that we can schedule? No, I'm just kidding. I think that there's huge value in just being thoughtful about that, right? Like we talked about money, the monetary component, but there's all of the ancillary stuff that's around that. Okay. So first step, we get our valuation. And then you mentioned de-risking, and that can look a lot of different ways, right? Depending on what your business is, it might, 100 different things could be available to de-risk it. But you talked a little bit about levers, Tim. I've read enough to be dangerous in these specific areas, and maybe Rod, I want to come to you in a second and talk about the role of insurance inside of strategic exit and succession planning. Okay, so talk a little bit about the levers, because I do know enough to know that just by being aware, being thoughtful about the way that your business is structured, and like you said, moving the levers, you can actually have a relatively significant impact on your business. And I can't think of an example because it's been, a while since I've spent a lot of time digging into this. But what does that mean when you talk about kind of the levers that could be pulled to create additional value in your business?
Yeah, I mean, I was referring to those two different areas, right? There's the profitability, which is it kind of speaks to your documentation, which is are your financials clearly, are they accurate? Are you running a lot of personal expenses through the business? Which
okay, so that's what I wanted to get at. That's what I wanted to get at. So let's say that we have a business owner, and how do we adjust the profitability other than just becoming more profitable? I guess my point was to say that there are things within just the structural side. And again, this isn't my expertise, but there's things within the structural side that you can tweak. Maybe the amount of compensation you're taking changes. Maybe, like you said, instead of running things through the business, you start running those things through the personal side. It creates additional value in the business. But my point is to say that the numbers can be tweaked, almost manipulated in a way that will create more value for the buyer and for yourself at the same time. Is that fair?
That's totally
okay.
fair.
Okay.
That's
Rod,
where,
let's move over.
Working with people that are helping you on the tax strategy side is really important. And it's kind of like that. Are you always shooting for top dollar on sale, right? Because as you're approaching an exit, as it becomes a little bit more serious, like you said, if you start taking some of the personal, more personal expenses out of the business, that means you're going to pay a little bit more in tax. So do we want to do that?
Right.
For the benefit of cleaning the business up for most profitable sale? Probably it's a good
cost-benefit
idea,
analysis, right?
Exactly.
I like it. Okay, Rod, I want to talk about business succession as it relates to the kind of stuff that we typically help people do, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about it, we're talking about funding a buy-sell agreement, right?
Yep.
We're talking about key man so that the next generation is there and available to keep the business running. But maybe just give us a broad overview of what that looks like on our side.
Sure. So, and it goes back to the 5 Ds, right?
5 Ds. Yep.
And two of them you just hit on right now. With a buy sell, the challenge is if I'm in a partnership and one of the partners dies, becomes disabled for some other reason, is no longer able to participate in the business, then we need a plan now before that starts to happen that is already in place, already understood, and fully funded. And fully funded means if the focus is disability, do all of the partners have enough disability and income to make things okay so that they're no longer a drag on the business while they're no longer able to contribute?
Or we're not moving into a distressed situation, right?
Yes.
To where now instead of selling when it's most optimal, we're looking at selling because I'm the spouse of an owner and I don't know how to run the business.
Mm-hmm.
I got to get rid of it. But by doing that, I'm also not going to get as much value because of that. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then again, the other part of buy sell is most often death. So having life insurance in place. And in this case, what's happening is the life insurance is going to the surviving partners, so they have the money to buy out the family, right? This, like you mentioned, the spouse who doesn't want to be involved. The partners don't want the spouse necessarily as their new partner. And so it's already, everything has been set in motion ahead of time so that they're obligated to buy out the spouse and they're given the funds through that life insurance policy. So they have the means to do that.
So Rod, it sounds like what you're saying is that I should make sure that I own some sort of insurance benefit so that if I have death or disability comes, then there's a way to handle that, right? Yep. Okay. Here's the thing that's interesting though. We also use life insurance as a method to fund business succession, to fund buy sell. Get into that for a second.
Yeah. Okay. If I'm the senior partner, right? I'm 60 years old and my partners are 50 and 45 and 40. It's clear I'm going to be the next guy to go, right? And
most likely.
So how is the transition going to happen when I get there? Again, we have to be thinking about these things ahead of time. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what's going to happen. And it can take a lot of different forms. Are the existing partners going to buy me out? Are we going to keep adding additional partners and those new partners are going to buy me out? Am I just getting enough distributions from the company so that I kind of create my own exit so that I have the what I need to be able to retire, even if it's not a quote unquote sell from the business, right? So that's where like the capital avalanche could come into play, for example. Building a plan where we're predetermining an amount that goes into that plan over the next whatever number of years, so that at this future time, there's an income that's there ready to kick in. And there are a lot of different names you might call this, deferred compensation, and all these different things, depending on the specific details of the plan. But as a broad stroke, that's really what we're trying to think ahead on.
Well, and there's lots of ways to fund a business succession strategy. However, we often talk to people about doing it in conjunction with like your buy-sell agreement, because life insurance has the additional tax benefits and features that I can't get in other places. That obviously it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if I have a business and I own life insurance, let's just say I own term insurance, well, the helps the business significantly if I die. If I don't die, however, I've got to come up with some other way to keep the business going. And so that ends up being a way to kind of build a natural funding process into the flow of the business.
Yeah, we often use the words like the capital avalanche or investment optimizer. They come with like, it's insurance you don't have to pay for in any other way, right?
Yeah, because no one likes to pay for insurance. Let's be really clear about that.
Yep. So if you can accomplish both, the most likely scenario is you will survive and you will retire and you will need that income. But if not, it has the built-in insurance piece of it as well.
Well, and even if you're, the partner that remains at the end, you have partners that go out of business before you. I think it's worth hitting on the estate planning implications, right? Especially, certainly it applies to a lot of people now, but if those,
if they go down, which they probably will,
then we're going to have a lot of people where, let's say your business is, a $15 million business. All of a sudden you're going to have a large estate tax bill that maybe the only way to pay it, if you don't plan properly, is to sell the business, which might be the opposite of what the family wants to do, especially if it's a really profitable business that's running independently of the owner and they have a great CEO in place running the thing.
Yeah,
you did everything else right? Maybe the kids did come in and it's rolling, but now you need cash and you don't have it.
Before we finish up, Tim, what do you see people doing to fund succession? Like, what are some of the ways that people actually fund this, movement into the next gen? We've hit on them, and you like notes and life insurance. Like, what would you say is most typical to help people with the actual money that is required to create a succession strategy?
Yeah, you talked about a couple creative options, which I think are really cool to investigate. A lot of times it's going to be where the buyer obtains some level of financing to buy out an owner. Obviously, if you're on the buyer side and the seller side, right, they've got different incentives. If you are a buyer, you might want a seller note where you don't have to go out and get financing. The seller kind of retains some of the risk and you pay them out over a period of time. There's some benefits to that, for a seller on the tax side, but a lot of times the seller just wants to get the big egg right at the sale, and reduce their risk there. If you bring leverage into that, you can make that happen, even if the buyer doesn't have all the money that they need to. There are some really creative situations where like private equity could come and take a position in addition to financing or in lieu of financing to facilitate a transition. Even if you have some owners retaining.
Yeah, we've seen, since so many of our clients are in the physician, medical, dental space, we have talked to and seen a lot of people who are, being approached by private equity companies to buy, either a portion or all of their business. So we see that a lot. But I think the key is, the reason we're having this conversation is because we want to emphasize the importance of starting early, first of all, right? Starting, planning, preparing for the most advantageous exit. Or non-exit, but either way, by planning for it, you put yourself in the best situation.
Actually, so anyway, nugget there. I think it fits here. Things like if you had somebody that you'd brought in a succession plan internally and you wanted them to get financing, you've got to think about whether or not they're going to qualify. And so there are some things that you can do in the years leading up to, like, let's say you're going to go an SBA route for financing. There are certain things that you can do to make it much easier on yourself by, maybe having the plan to transfer a certain amount of equity before that sale so that the buyer has some skin in the game. So there's things like that again, you don't want to be planning. Had a buddy that was, buying a business in a similar situation. It just was this, nightmare back and forth, and expectations were all over the board. The sellers were disappointed they weren't going to get, a higher valuation. My buddy's trying to figure out a way to do it in a fair way, but there wasn't any planning, and so
it's messy anyway.
Seller's in a bind. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyone have any other points they want to hit on before we close things up for today? Okay, this has been a fun conversation. Tim, thanks for hanging out with us, co-hosting the pod. Tim's a part of our team, so if anybody out there listening is interested in exploring the business succession strategies, like just business succession planning as a whole, making sure that their business is in the best possible situation, shoot us an email. We'll make sure that we connect you with Timothy. And Tim, it's been awesome having you, man. Thanks again.
I think I had the most fun. This was great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.